Welcome to the Irish NFL Show. This is our Week 1 Talking Points show in association with our partner QuinnBet. Thanks to all of you who are joining us for the live stream this Monday night. And if you're listening back to the podcast, you are also, of course, very welcome. And particularly if you're with us for the first time, thanks for coming in. And please do remember to like and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Well, we had the predictable unpredictability of the opening Sunday of football action. The witching hour was particularly bewitching in the early slate of games. We had no fewer than 6 games enter the fourth quarter with just a single score between the teams and a lot of exciting tight finishes in that window. 9 o'clock window a little bit slower, but things did pick up again on Sunday Night Football, where we had the rematch of last year's NFC wildcard game between the Rams and the Lions in Detroit. There was a dramatic overtime finish there as David Montgomery, of what Kieran likes to refer to as the firm of Gibson Montgomery, ran for a walk-off touchdown there. Overall, we saw plenty of upsets. We had some late contract drama surrounding the Bengals' Ja'Marr Chase, and we had a pre-game arrest in Miami. In fact, we had 2 of them technically, where the fastest cop in Florida succeeded where most NFL defensive backs have failed, and he managed to put the cuffs on Tyreek Hill, who then channeled that for a celebration as he emerged from the dressing room just in time for kickoff at Hard Rock Stadium. And it is to Hard Rock Stadium where we start our discussion, because sometimes the more things change, the more they say the same. Kieran, normal service resumed by Tyreek and the Dolphins. All they ever do is win in September, and all Tyreek does is score. Now, I'm being slightly facetious there because the Jags really left this one behind them.
Yeah, and just listening to sports radio here in the Jacksonville area, it's another case of seen it before, and it's just a case of the Jags being unable to secure the win. I mean, this is 6 losses out of 7 now for Jacksonville. The last win they had was New Year's Eve against Bryce Young and the Panthers, and it's going back to the old theme with the Jaguars. Doug Peterson was he coaching scared? Should he have gone for a little bit more? And then the fumbles keep coming back to resurface, whether it's Lawrence or whether it's Tank Bigsby, and on this occasion it was ETN in the end zone, and that's really what undid the Jaguars. Notwithstanding that 80-yard run from Tyreek Hill, but it's another case of Jaguars. They had the game in their hand, and this is the first time in a long time that they've let a double-digit lead at halftime evaporate, and it's troubling. And it's one of those games that the Jags could have had, being up 17-7 at the half, but that inability to close games out and have that killer instinct, and the questions still remain about Lawrence in the big situations, and the same questions still arise about Doug Peterson and his coaching towards the end of the game. So. More of a case of a game the Jags should have had over all the drama that covered Miami earlier in the day. But like you said, the Dolphins pull it out and they do what they do best. They win in the heat, and that was a big win for them week 1.
Brian, we associate Doug Peterson with the Philly special, but as Kieran calls out rightly there, they really did turtle up towards the end of that game. They had a double-digit lead, as Kieran was saying, into the fourth quarter. Everything seemed to be going well. Their defense was lights out. Trayvon Walker picked up in particular where he left off last season. They did an unbelievable job on those incredibly dangerous Dolphins receivers in Waddle and Hill. I know they broke off a couple of explosive between them, but that's just going to happen. For the most part, they did exactly what could have been expected of them. Lawrence had 1 passing attempt on the final 3 drives. I mean, if you're trying not to lose in the NFL, you're going to end up getting what you deserve.
True, but you touched on there the nature of how well their defense played for large parts of the game. You look at the numbers in the first half: 4 punts by the Dolphins, 2 turnovers on downs by the Dolphins. Yes, he went conservative when he takes it out of Trevor Lawrence's hand, but part of him was thinking, we're in a good position here because our defense has played so well all day. And even small looking at Tua's numbers, they're quite distorted. It's 330 odd yards, but you just touched on there, kind of an 80-yard touchdown to Tyreek Hill. Yeah, I agree. He has gone conservative, but sometimes there's a rationale behind it, and he obviously felt his defense was doing enough over the course of the 4 quarters to keep the Dolphins at bay. And as much as we kind of discussed the fact that Etienne had the ball punched out, sometimes you have to give credit to the defense. Javon Holland has come in from the side. It's a fantastic play. It's similar to the play which we saw in the championship game last year where Snead did it to Flowers, and it also happened in the Bengals game with the Patriots, knocking the ball out. These are significant plays, but if he goes in there, the game is over. And they were running the ball quite effectively. That running touchdown puts the game away. Wasn't to be. Certainly one they'll look back on and reflect. They should have had it. For the Dolphins, we're so used to them winning pretty in September in the heat. Sometimes we we got to see them win uncomprehensively, and yesterday certainly was that way. They got over the line. It's a big win, bearing in mind they've got the Bills coming up quickly on Thursday night.
What do we make of the Dolphins, Noel? One thing that you can't take for granted with them is the amount of speed they have and the amount of creative ways that Mike McDaniel generally finds to unleash that. And yet there was times when I was looking at them going, I seem to be seeing this swing pass or this bubble screen to Achane or Mostert or somebody in the backfield who makes a man miss and breaks through for big yardage over and over again. They seem to go to the same well quite often and just rely on playmakers making plays. I know that's what they're there to do and that's what they're paid to do. But over the course of a season, clever defensive coordinators will figure you out. Like, actually, as we were saying, Jacksonville in the whole did a very good job on limiting the damage that those playmakers could cause. They're going to come up against other stiff challenges the season ahead. And you wonder if McDaniel has really spent the offseason cooking up anything new, because it did look a little bit same old to me.
Yeah, but you talked about it there, Connor. I mean, they rely on these exciting, explosive players to just go and win games. The lads talked about the 80-yard touchdown. I mean, that comes because of a great defensive play, and then they kind of just flip it like that. I mean, the running game wasn't amazing today, but then you have those players in Waddle there, to Waddle and Hill to kind of turn it around them when you need to be. But as you mentioned it gets old quickly. Teams cop onto things, players get injured and things kind of go downhill a bit. So it will be interesting to see if he has something different, because I think we've talked about it multiple times with the Dolphins. And for me, I think it'll happen this year. They start off like a house on fire, but it does kind of seem to catch up with them in the end. So it'll be interesting to see, will it be just same again in a different year, or will they have something different? But they certainly have the players there that when it is switched on and when it does work, they can absolutely frighten any defense in this league. It's just whether or not they have that stamina to let that run for the whole season.
Because I did have a thought watching them at times, and maybe you'll identify with this one. Like, Luke Getsy was getting killed for the type of things that Mike McDaniel does over and over again. But I suppose Dolphins just had better playmakers than the Bears had last year, so maybe they can get away with it.
Absolutely. Look, if you have Tyreek Hill and Waddle and Achane who are bursting off these amazing plays that just look brilliant on camera, and 80 yards here and 70 yards there, it papers up a lot of kind of cracks or a lot of issues. I mean, look, as a Bears fan, I wish Getsy had those options, but he didn't have them. And that's just the way it works. You need to work with what you have. And more often than not with this Dolphins team, it will work for the majority of the season because they're so good. But obviously you need to have that second level and that plan B as the season is drawn to a close and it really becomes crunch time, that you need to obviously have something different that teams haven't seen before to try and keep that going.
Kieran, before we leave Florida, you've been listening, as you were saying, to some of the Jacksonville media corps, and they're obviously particularly unhappy. The seat that Doug Peterson was sitting on, not that he was sitting for most of the game, obviously he's standing, but it's notoriously, literally hot in Miami on the visitor sideline. But how hot is Doug Peterson's coaching seat this season? Because following that late season collapse when they were so well placed last year, we talked about it a lot in the off season, looked like they were running away with it at one point, destined for the playoffs and in good shape, and then they absolutely fell apart down the stretch. You would wonder how much rope he's going to have if they don't turn this around quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big month for them. They got the Browns next week. They're going to have to get a win in that one. And a lot of it stems from Shad Khan, who said, the ending of last season was unacceptable and it won't happen again, or there will be changes made. So, the Jaguars are very much, and they know this and the media knows this, they're in a win now mode. There are no excuses. It's a bolstered up roster than it has been the last number of years. Everything's in place, skill positions. That defense, like you said, played really good yesterday. They've got some really good linebackers and DNs. We already know about, Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, but everything's in place for the Jaguars to win now. But the same, like I mentioned earlier, the same questions are arising about Trevor Lawrence. Can he make it happen in the crunch moments? And again, Doug Peterson's coaching style. Is it going to be enough? Press Taylor, the offensive coordinator, is also taking a little bit of slack. He's always been, more so than Doug Peterson in Jacksonville, he's always been under the microscope a little bit more with a lot of the play calling. So the temperature will really, much like the heat here, the temperature will turn up on those guys if they're going to be 2-2 by week 5.
Brian, let's go to the Cowboys-Browns game, because we talked about why Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year last year. The Browns had 5 different starting quarterbacks last season, and they had make do and mend, and they eventually got on a bit of a roll with Joe Flacco, went to the playoffs, and pulled it out of the fire in a major way, and really burnished his coaching credentials, or showed up what he could do. Ironically, the one quarterback who wasn't getting it done last season was the one that they've paid all this guaranteed money to in Deshaun Watson. And I know you don't want to overreact to week 1, but there was nothing we saw from him yesterday which would indicate that any sort of corner has been turned here. He appears fit, as far as we were told. He's not suffering from any injury. I don't think he attempted a pass longer than 6 yards in the first half yesterday. There doesn't seem to be any explosion there, either in the legs or the arm. He doesn't have the excuse that players are out or players are injured, because the same players were out or injured for points of time last year. I think somebody, it might have been Bill Barnwell, I hope I'm not misattributing this, said that last year at one of the games where Amari Cooper was out, which is against the Jets, not exactly slouches on defense, Flacco threw for 309 yards and 3 touchdowns. Deshaun Watson doesn't even look close to that kind of production, and it's a major, major problem.
I'd go beyond that initial stat you had, Connor. He didn't have a drive beyond 13 yards for 3 quarters in the game. He had 53% passer rate yesterday, passing completion. It was a disaster from start to finish. And okay, the initial opening drive, they had a field goal, but let's be fair, they got 37 yards, I believe, off the punt return. But I never got going, and yeah, it was very misconstrued to see. And there was some really kind of little bits and pieces coming out today across various different social outlets, and in particular where certain players were on the ground and he's trying to help them up, and they didn't want to even get involved or engage with him whatsoever. And we saw that last year where you see Josh Allen. If Josh Allen goes down off a sack,
would you want to touch him given his history?
Well, we're not going there. I know we're not entertaining that. What I would say is I don't really like
history.
Look, I think most Browns fans, I spoke to a few before the season started, they were a little bit concerned about the quarterback situation, because you touched on there, Joe Flacco, even in his later years of his career, was able to go in lights out last season and I suppose utilize the players that were around them. They look a bit light offensively. Like the running back game is not the same without Chubb, and he's on IR. He's not due back for another 4 to 5 weeks. And then we're making an assumption he's going to come back and hit the ground running, bearing in mind the significant injury he got last season. And Judy, Colin, our former colleague, he has his thoughts on Judy. He's not a wide receiver 1. He's probably not even a wide receiver 2. The way he's played over the last 2 to 3 years, they just seem a bit light offense. Defensively is where this team ultimately is going to be carried. And but then if you flip it, we're talking about defenses. I don't want to get away from the Browns. I know that was the initial question, but Mike Zimmer has been not really discussed this season. This offseason, he's gone into Dallas. There was a lot of focus on Dan Quinn and how well he did last year. Like yesterday, 6 sacks. The offensive line for the Browns was demoralized all day long. He just touched the numbers there. Not giving up a drive beyond 13 yards. He was the MVP yesterday. He put that defense together. It didn't look like there was any transition into a new coordinator. That's what you want to see as a fan. And for a Cowboys team, didn't even have to do a lot offensively yesterday. Dak's numbers don't really jump off the page. Just didn't have to do a lot because their defense stifled the Browns all day long. Big win, and it kind of puts a marker down very early, despite the Eagles winning on Friday night that the Cowboys mean business this season.
Yeah. I know, Kieran, as Brian was saying there, we're not going to get into the past as far as Watson is concerned, but it is what it is. And let's face it, a lot of us and a lot of people more broadly were hoping that things would end up this way, because it's kind of what both he and the Browns deserve. But it's a significant problem for the franchise, right? Because they're stuck on the hook for all this guaranteed money. There's no way of moving on from him. Like, ironically, probably the best thing he could do is get injured, even though they'd still be paying him. At least they can slot in somebody else under center, as they managed to do quite successfully last year.
Yeah, like you said, with the money, 230 guaranteed. He was just not impressive in any facet yesterday. He doesn't exude confidence. His players, his teammates don't seem to have any confidence in him. Doesn't seem like he's a leader. It's a bad situation, which again, why were the Browns -3 on Sunday? That didn't make any sense. Again,
yeah,
the Cowboys...
you pointed that out in the WhatsApp
yeah.
chat yesterday, and I have to say, I'll hold my hands up because I picked the Browns to win that game. I know I wasn't the only one. And I thought, Browns at home catching 3 points. Maybe Vegas knows something that I don't. Maybe the desert knows something that I don't. And that completely put a different spin on my analysis of that game, and I paid the price for it in a major way.
And it just turned into another, regular season Dallas win, 30+ points. Dak looks good. CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks has a catch. Micah Parsons is doing Micah Parsons things. and everything's in sync. And the Browns were the exact opposite of that. They were very, very poor. Like Brian said, with Chubb being out for a while, who's catching the ball? And Njoku went out. That was a big injury too. So that automatically stifles the ability to make any plays on top of Deshaun Watson's inability to do anything. Just a rough day for the Browns. I mean, again, the story will be more about Dallas and Zeke is back, and Dak got paid and he's throwing the ball around. But it's disappointing for Browns fans because you've gone through years and years of terrible football. You get to the playoffs last year, then you get boat raced by the Texans, and now you're back in the regular season, and then this happens, and you just basically got steamrolled by the Cowboys in Week 1 at home. So tough to swallow for the Browns.
It's tough on all counts, no, because not only are the Browns bemoaning the decision that their ownership and GM made and to leave them on the hook for the guaranteed money that Kieran's already spoken about, but they've also watched the Texans take that draft capital and completely turn around their entire franchise. Obviously, that's in large part down to them having taken CJ Stroud with one of those picks, but it's a tale of two cities there, and a tale of it's a real sliding doors moment in an NFL sense. But what do you think the future holds for the Browns this season? Because the defense is looking pretty much on point. I know Dallas managed to put up a lot of points, but that's because they're gassed by the end. They're on the field so often, and they got early pressure on Dak. They picked up a good couple of sacks early on, maybe exposing the center. Tyler Guyton, the rookie center, got blown up on one particular play where I think it was Tomlinson went straight through and just nailed Dak. Myles Garrett, I think, picked up a sack as well. So they're able to do what they were able to do last year defensively, but unless they can move the ball down the field, and at times Watson didn't even look like he wanted to do that. As Kieran said, he didn't look like there was any motivation there. He was happy to take a check down to Foreman and just pick up little small chunks of yardage over the middle rather than let anything fly. The complete opposite to Joe Flacco, which seems like it's what this offense needs to get going.
Yeah, no, look, you said it there. I mean, they're going to have to rely on this defense all season long. Kira mentions Njoku goes out. They don't have much around there beyond him anyway. As you say, Brian talked, Jerry Jeudy's, Amari Cooper. They're going to have to try and make the best of what they can with those players. But it looks so bleak on offense for them now at the moment. The sooner they can get out of this deal, I mean, you mentioned the Texans. That's just rubbing salt in the wounds, absolutely, completely. For a Browns fan, it must be sickening to see the way everything has just evolved from this big trade that, as you say, Connor, is that sliding doors moment where everything changes for this franchise. Who knows where they could be if they make a different choice back then, but they pushed the ball out for Watson. It was crazy at the time. It now looks treble that crazy, and they really do need to rely on this defense now. Maybe if he does get injured, maybe they can.
The happiest people in the NFL over this are the Minnesota Vikings, because it's now put the Herschel Walker great trade robbery into second place.
Absolutely, and any team that were battling the Browns, who thought they had the Watson deal done, and the Browns came back in and gazumped them, will be just sitting there thanking whoever they thank that
hello Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah. Exactly what I was thinking. Cousins didn't have the best of games yesterday, but I'd rather have a Kirk Cousins on his 100 million than Deshaun Watson on whatever he's on. Look, they just need to work with this defense to keep them in games, and then they're going to have to sort something out like they did last year on offense. But it looks like it's just going to be a tough slog on offense. Now, it is week 1, as you say, maybe things change. Obviously, they're missing both the tackles yesterday, which doesn't help. But still, that quarterback didn't look like he wanted to be there, and he played like, I don't know. I don't know what. The quicker they can get out of that deal is basically it for the Browns, and just move on from this whole disaster.
Brian, the Cowboys actually won that game, in fairness. So, let's look at some of what they did, because, as Kieran said, this is a team that's racked up regular season wins at some clip over the last couple of years. 3 12-win seasons in a row. They've won more games over the regular season than any other team in the NFL over that span. We know the playoffs are obviously a completely different story, but perhaps we slightly slept on them and forgot just what they have at their disposal, because CD looked awesome. Dak looked like he was able to do what regular season Dak does. And even Zeke Elliott was happy to be back in the band and kicking it up a notch. He looked like he'd rolled back the years yesterday.
You may have slept on them, Conor. I still picked them to win the NFC East this year and retain their title. We touched on it last night on the show. The instant reaction myself and Kieran. The cohesion on the team last night in particular, it looked like this Dak deal. Like, there's no way that Dak deal wasn't formalized earlier in the week. I imagine. I think it was one of those. Let's hold fire on that till Sunday afternoon. It's a nice, geo for all our supporters. The team looked very relaxed, confident going into that game, and it's the measure of a team that didn't do a lot in the offseason in terms of moving players around. And we touched on it in the NFC East preview that maybe they didn't have to. Maybe they felt that this team are essentially in a great position to run it back, win the division, and maybe right some wrongs of what happened in that, I suppose, that divisional round game against the Packers last year when they got the doors were blown off them by halftime. But Kieran's made the point. There's regular season Cowboys and there's postseason Cowboys, and we need to see the regular season transition into the postseason. They've got the Saints at home this weekend, very winnable game. So you can only imagine if come week 6, week 7, if the Cowboys are 6-1, the momentum builds, and then obviously the expectations build that comes with that. But Jerry Jones, in fairness, this offseason he's tied down Lamb, he's tied down Dak. Obviously, Micah Parsons is next. And once people may not like him, he's getting the deals done. Obviously, this is probably bigger picture further down the line in terms of the cap space. But right now, it looks like they're going in the right direction, and they get all the players on board, and they got their quarterback for the future.
Kieran, I know we've dumped on Deshaun Watson, but to be fair, the other side of that was that the Cowboys defense wasn't exactly offering much by the way of open receivers or indeed letting up on the pressure up front. They're well stocked at pretty much every level, and all their playmakers were making plays. Diggs looked electric. Micah Parsons was doing Micah Parsons things, and everywhere you looked, there were Cowboys flying around with their hair on fire on defense.
Yeah, and doing all that without DaRon Bland as well. And but not to say that the Browns made it easy for them, but with that limited offense, it was a really not a cupcake game for the Cowboys, but that was the best possible game they could have had yesterday. Just everything fell into the lap between Watson and between a couple of the injuries that went on during the game, and just an inability to move the ball or make any catches. There's actually a clip on social media of about 2.5-3 minutes of Deshaun Watson's passing, and it's just atrocious. There could have been about 5 or 6 different picks on any of those throws. None of them were anywhere near a Browns receiver or any kind of player at all. So it's just bad stuff all around for the Browns. And like we've all talked, that contract is going to be hanging around their neck for a long time. But again, that Dallas defense, again, until they prove us otherwise or they show otherwise during the regular season, the Cowboys are what they are. They're going to be a juggernaut in the regular season, and they're going to put up a boatload of points. But will they be able to do it again in January is the question.
All right, let's move on and talk about some of the rookies who showed out over the weekend. And it's one of the things I guess we really love when a new season starts, and particularly in week 1. You want to see how that shiny new rookie is going to slot in, the ones that get to start in week 1. And we saw a lot of them scattered around. We've been waiting a long time since April to see how they'd actually fare when they suited up in a regular season game. I'm going to throw out some names, and feel free to jump in, lads, and add your own. But a couple of the ones that impressed me over the weekend, Ladd McConkey at the Chargers, their new wide receiver, Brian, had a really good game, got his first touchdown in his first game. We were focused a lot on what the Chargers were going to do in terms of the run game and how Harbaugh was going to deploy that. But they've still got some juice despite letting go of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen in the passing game too. And Ladd McConkey was going to have to do a lot. And so far, he's shown up pretty well as far as I could see.
Yeah, when I saw him, walk that touchdown in last night, I was kind of reflecting on our live show last April in Cork, Conor, where there was a lot of suggestion he may go late first round. He goes very early on in the second round. And you touched on it on the show even towards the night. The expectation is more of a run-orientated teams like Kieran touched on. They're more run-orientated. It's what Harbaugh wants to do. And essentially in the second half, that's what they did on the Raiders. But the pressure's on him, and he stepped up yesterday. They've lost a lot of players in the offseason, wide receiver room, but they brought the average age of this wide receiver room down quite well. I always felt he was one of those players that would hit the ground running. There's so much expectation on these guys at the upper echelons, top end, the Harrisons, the Neighbors, Rome Odunze. There's always going to be this second round wide receiver, third round wide receiver. Even in the latter stages last night, the Rams, I think it was a fourth or fifth round wide receiver runs in a touchdown, and fortunately it's called back on a hold. These guys are all, when you see these players stepping up, and we forget it. We get so focused on the first round, Conor. You forget there's lovely players in the second round, third round, these gems that come along. So it's great to see straight away these guys are going to be household names within 3 to 4 months, and we'll be reflecting on some great plays over the course of the season.
And Brian, you set up a lovely segue, because while we're talking about lovely second round picks, Keon Coleman went from Florida State University to the Bills. Poor old FSU 0-2 now. They really missed the players who got drafted, including Coleman, another guy we're going to talk about shortly. But a Josh Allen pair of touchdowns that he ran in, but one of those was set up by a beautiful catch from Coleman on the sideline, tightly covered, and picked up the ball beautifully, showing those late hands, the kind of hands you'd normally associate with a guy like Mike Evans, a veteran. This guy can play.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, another player that everyone thought potentially first round goes early, goes the first pick of the second round. And we touched on the show the other day, like Josh Allen is, you could say he's not playing a lot there in terms of the wide receiver room. Players stepping up yesterday. Shakir, goes in for touchdown. But the Coleman catch in particular was fantastic. And it was at a moment in the game where you needed a player to make a step up and make a big play. Josh Allen was making them all day. Cook was doing his business, but you needed wide receivers to stand up and make that big play, which led to a touchdown in the end. So like he's contributing immediately. There was a few other nice, he pulled in a few nice players. We always felt he had the talent. There was can the Bills over the course of the season get enough out of him to go all the way? That's obviously ultimately the bigger question. And we're going to see them in a big AFC East clash come towards. But yeah, like the Bills will find ways to navigate, plays with these guys, and Coleman stepping up immediately.
Another FSU player, Kieran, who left a big hole was Jared Verse. They would love to have him back this season, given how things have gone from the Seminoles. But he, alongside Braden Fisk, went to the Rams, and they had big boots to fill because they were expected to take up the load left by the newly departed Aaron Donald. Rams didn't win last night, but they certainly didn't win because of any lack of effort on defense. And I thought Verse showed well and grabbed his first bag of the season on Jared Goff early on in that game.
Yeah, and that was, I believe that was right before halftime, which was a big stop for the Rams. Yeah, Verse had a really good game in what was a very defensive first half of the Rams-Lions games. Rams-Lion game, very 3 and out and very heavy on tackles and physicality. I thought overall it was a tough day for a lot of the rookies. Bo Nix, I don't know if we're going to get into some of the other players, but Bo Nix, Caleb Williams struggled. He did only 14 of 29. He didn't even get 100 yards. Jaden Daniels struggled. We heard something from one of the players before the game that they weren't expecting him to put the team on his shoulder and just to be a player. But it felt like watching that game that he was taking the weight of the world on his shoulders and trying to make all sorts of plays. He still hasn't figured out the slide. he almost hurt himself trying to slide.
What's going on with that? Like you can see kindergartners in your parts of the world who can do a tumble better than that. Like if you're going to do a tumble, but you probably shouldn't put your head into a tackle in the NFL when you could just slide.
Yeah, I think with
I've never watched Hard Knocks and the slip and slide with Caleb Williams. Come on, it's there on HBO for you.
Well, he was with LSU and he had first round wide receivers to throw to, so I don't think he was in too many positions where and big horses right in front of him. He wasn't really tried out that much for to have to tumble and roll around, but. Like Jaden Downs, that was a tough intro for him because, again, like we've discussed, probably a dearth of talent on that Washington team, and he probably thought he had to take it on his shoulders himself. Eckler did a little bit of work, but other than that, he's trying to make plays and trying to dink and dunk and a couple of,
Jesus, Tyke leader, if you're listening, Commanders need a kicker. Jesus, yeah. Cade York could do nothing. Like they should have been actually in that game. I know it got away from them in the end, but it should have been a lot closer down the stretch. They 2 badly missed field goals. That, really hurt.
Connor, sorry. York has been released this evening.
Oh wow, okay.
And if you played 2 games, the Browns were getting a pick back, and they didn't even hang around for the pick. They've released.
Right, get Rory begging over there, lads. We'll sort that one out for you. Right, I'm going to hold it there because we'll take a quick break and we'll come back. And you've touched on it there a little bit, Kieran. We'll talk about some of the rookies who had tougher debuts. Welcome back to the second segment of the Irish NFL Show's Week 1 talking points from the action over the first weekend of regular season action in the NFL. We've been talking about some of the rookies who showed out in Week 1. Let's maybe turn to some of those who had a slightly tougher outing when they made their debuts in the regular season for their teams. Noel, for Caleb Williams, he managed to rack up the first win by a quarterback drafted number 1 overall since David Carr in 2002. So that's something, but it wasn't really down to anything that he did.
No, it was certainly a tough day for the number 1 pick. Look, going into the first game of the season, that all these rookies, it might not go the way that you think because they're young and they're just learning. But this really is not what I think a lot of Bears fans pictured was going to be the way this game would go. Now, obviously, offensive line was a shambles yesterday. It just got absolutely manhandled. Coleman Sheldon at centre just really had a tough day. So that didn't help Williams. But still, there was a lot he did wrong himself. There was players he missed. There were times he was dropping back, then he was trying to run, and suddenly you were looking at 3rd and 20 odd because he'd got sacked so far back. It just didn't seem to go the way that, as I say, a lot of people predicted, given how he looked in pre-season against any pre-season. But still,
I will say in his defence, Noel, a couple of things. Firstly, it looked to me at times as though Shane Waldron had picked Luke Getsy's playbook out of the recycling bin in Chicago and gone, "Oh, this is handy. No point coming up with my own plays," because we saw a lot of the same old predictable stuff from last year. But also, to your point, he had a terrible miss down the left sideline to Keenan Allen. Like, he wildly overthrew Keenan Allen, who was so far open, you couldn't even see where the nearest defender was, and it seemed to shake his confidence because he's a big play guy, loves the big play, no more than any other quarterback does. It's what made his name in USC. Off platform, big heaves down the sideline, dropping the ball in the bucket. We saw him do it to Rome Odunze in the preseason, but it wasn't there for him.
No, it wasn't. And he talked in pre-season about not getting nerves and stuff. I don't know. I think you're right. I think something went wrong. And then I think maybe he did have those little bit of nerves, but he wasn't helped out by the rest of his offense, in fairness. I mean, even DeAndre Swift at running back didn't look great. Again, this could all come back to an offensive line that just wasn't cohesive and was just in trouble from the start. But look, it's Week 1. We don't want to overreact one way or the other to a rookie performance. It's going to be a tough game for them next weekend against the Texans, and it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But there's absolutely a lot of room for improvement. It was just a tough day for Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and it's a good shout. No, we don't want to be getting stuck on any rookies who had tough debuts in Week 1. Like, it's something that we're interested to talk about. But these guys coming in, it's a big transition from college to the NFL. None of us are in any doubt about that. And we expect a lot of these guys will get better as the season goes on. But one interesting one, Brian, I thought was Terrion Arnold at the Lions, and I will say he's a guy that I called out as a potential defensive rookie of the year, standout corner from Alabama. We credited Brad Holmes and praised the Detroit management for identifying a weakness and addressing it through the draft. Terrion Arnold was one of the players that they brought in there to try and shore up that secondary, which was one of the few obvious weaknesses they had last year. If they have done major surgery, it seems like the scar is yet to heal. He got picked on all day long. It's not like the Rams are short of receiving talent or in the quarterback department. So Stafford was always going to make hay if he thought there was any sort of weakness there. It was a tough day for Terrion Arnold on an island.
Yeah, especially I thought more so as the game moved on. Kupp came into the game in more focus, obviously because of injuries on the Rams offense, and he had a day, and like people are kind of wondering whether Kupp can still put it together, because I suppose the limelight come up slightly because of the nature of the draft capital in terms of what they brought in last year and how successful they were. But Kupp, obviously, is an experienced guy. You've got a wide receiver, Super Bowl MVP. Bear in mind, he was the MVP of that Super Bowl, and he's going up against a rookie. He's obviously going to find ways to navigate and have a dominant game. That one, if we're going to talk about the game as a broader landscape, the Rams will feel like that's one that got away. I know they came back from 2 touchdowns down, but they had the ball, they were driving, and it looked like the Lions at that stage couldn't find a way to stop them, and they only needed probably 1 or 2 more first downs to essentially put the game away, and they allowed the Lions to get that last opportunity. But yeah, look, this is the team of cornerback. We saw it last year with Tay Banks, the Giants' first-round pick. You get games where you're isolated in Ireland. Tay Banks was isolated against Jefferson yesterday. It's tough. It's so fast for some of these guys going up against really experienced wide receivers and some of the best, the creme de la creme. But ultimately, you'll come back from that, and like the Lions, you can see already the momentum's building. It's a big win. They got over the line, and I imagine over the course of the season we'll see him come to the fore.
Bo Nix Kieran is another one. You mentioned him very briefly earlier, who struggled a little bit in his debut, but not entirely sure he was helped by the play design there either. The idea of throwing the ball is it's the most efficient way in theory to move the football from one end of the field to the other, but Broncos threw 40-odd passes and they might as well have run the ball because the yards per attempt was, I think it was under 3 in the end. It was pathetic.
Yeah, that was, and again, just from post-draft discussions, are the Broncos sold on Bo Nix, or was he just the only guy that was out there for him? Were they just filling in a hole any old way they could? 26 of 42, 138 yards, 2 interceptions. That's a very tough day. That's a very tough day. It's a decent Seattle defense, but they made things easy for Seattle towards the end. I mean, I know it wasn't a foregone conclusion by the fourth quarter, but nobody was in any doubt that Seattle was going to wrap that up. And Bo Nix, just the questions remain: the frame, the physicality, decision making. Peyton, was it Peyton's guy? Was he just taken because he was there and he was the best of a bad lot? I'm not convinced of Peyton's kind of confidence in Nix, and the upward learning curve is going to be very steep for this Broncos offense. There's not a lot out there on offense, and it's going to be tough sledding for Bo Nix in a very difficult opening couple of weeks.
Noel, I have a public service announcement to make to Drew Petzing, the offensive coordinator of the Arizona Cardinals. You draft the most exciting wide receiver that many of us have seen for many years coming out of college, Marvin Harrison Jr. Really good idea if maybe you give him a couple of targets. Just going to throw that one out there. It's no point having him there if you're not going to throw him the ball.
Yeah, talking about not expecting the performance in Williams, certainly not expecting that from Marvin Harrison. Obviously, the hype and the talent this player has. I think he maybe only ended up with 3 or 4 targets. He ended up with 1 reception for 4 yards, which is apparently the fewest in a debut by a wide receiver taken in the top 5 since 1992. Certainly not something that we were thinking when we kind of saw him going to the Cardinals. And then the Cardinals put up a lot of points, and if you hadn't been watching the game, you'd probably thinking he was well involved and whatever. But it just didn't click. I think Kyler Murray had a tough time at points during that game.
It was the Greg Dortch and James Conner show all day long. There was nothing, he wasn't getting a look in.
Yeah, no, it just didn't happen. Again, you'll expect more going forward with a player like this. You say you got to work this guy into your team. He is a potential superstar if everything trends the way it's been going from a college career. But it was surprising. 4 yards, 1 reception is just not what you see from him. But again,
the template here surely is what the Chiefs do with their wide receivers, right? Because obviously you don't want to load everything up on a young guy in his first couple of games in the league. You got to find a way to work him in, but also a way to work him in a way that's meaningful, as the Chiefs did with Xavier Worthy, as the Chargers did with Ladd McConkey. There's other examples around the league, even this very week, where teams have a guy that they expect to be a superstar, but they're not giving him superstar workload in week 1. But didn't even seem like, and then of course Harrison gets the predictable questions from media afterwards. You think he should have got more targets? That's a very unfair place to put him after his first regular season game, and that's not on him at all.
No, that's it, absolutely. And again, you say you have to work this guy in. That's what you go up there and you get him so high in the draft for. For a lot of people, he's the best player coming out of that draft. So yeah, it's week 1, you say, okay, fair enough, week 1, things like that happen. But going forward, you really do expect the Cardinals to get him more involved. As you say, in different ways. You don't have to just be throwing the ball. You can tweak it about a bit, but he is a talented player. He is an explosive and an exciting player who can put defenses in trouble. So you just need to work him in somehow. It's not good enough 4 yards on 1 reception.
And as Alicia is saying in the comments, she's spot on. I remember we were tweeting this clip last night as well. Kyler Murray missed him wide open on what would have been a winning touchdown as well. So he's not helped by Kyler maybe not being able to see over his offensive line at times. That's going to be an ongoing issue for the Cardinals with little Kyler at quarterback. Brian, sorry.
Just on Kyler Murray in the second half. Like, as much as we're kind of, I suppose, downplaying Harrison's involvement because of Murray not getting the ball. Murray only threw for 31 yards in the entirety of the second half. I mean, the Bills defense essentially, they got ahead of steam in the second half. You're right. Okay, the last drive, he was wide open, and look, in fairness to the Cardinals, they're in a position to go and tie the game up, even potentially win the game. I think the Cardinals still, as a broader landscape in terms of where this team is, I think they come out of the game with their health high. We touched on it last night on the instant reaction. They went to Buffalo. They've put up points early. Like a lot of people felt they would have just went in there yesterday with the doors blown off, and it wasn't to be. And I think there's better days ahead for Harrison. But you're right. You're looking at numbers, and it doesn't look very good. And it's surprising, bearing in mind, as you say, the fourth pick of the draft and the hype that comes with him that he's not targeted. But was he bottled up all day and he just didn't see the point in going towards him? Maybe that's another rationale behind it.
One thing we also saw in that Arizona game, Brian, was the first kickoff return for a touchdown under the new rule. DJ Dallas, the man taking the honors there. How did you feel the kickoff rule was working overall? I know it's early to tell. We did see it in preseason too, but we are at least seeing more returns. And it does seem, admittedly, from a very small sample, you're not seeing massive collisions, which is, something that we're all thankful for in terms of playing talent and not want to see guys get injured. I'm not sure if it's adding massively to the excitement. There's still obviously plenty of touchbacks, but it does add a slight more of an element of skill from the kicker's point of view. And we are seeing more returns, which is what we want.
I'm kind of mixed on it, Connor, because I was reading some information last week. I think we spoke about it briefly. Like a lot of the teams have made a decision they're going to kick it into the end zone. And I think they were looking at the statistics that came with pre-season. I think the average return was 28.7 yard line. So they're suffering one and a half yards additional, allowing for the team to start at the 30-yard line. I think if it was going towards the 35, we might see a different strategy. It is exciting to a certain extent, but I don't think we've seen the massive impact, even for the ones that have been returned, and even some of them yesterday, where the offense, as in the kicking team, resulted in the flag because the kicker weren't getting it into the right areas. So it just, to me, it seems like it's a little bit complicated. There's a few rationales and different rules around, depending on where the kicker puts the ball into. But ultimately, what you want is to see DJ Dallas, who obviously was in Seattle. We never seen him kind of have rumbles like that back in Seattle. And maybe it was Marshawn Lynch and the Earthquakes back in the day. But it was a fantastic. And I brought the Cardinals back into the game. It looked like they were out of it. But you'd like to see more of them. But so far, it hasn't been the case. I think everybody had this expectation we're going to see with reels of punt return, of kickoff returns, and it hasn't been the case. Defenses in that particular special teams. Sorry, Connor, I know you didn't want to say defenses were on top in week one. Special teams was on top in week one with the new rule.
No, what I said was we were banning the defense is ahead of the offense early in the season cliche, which everybody throws out for the first couple of weeks of any new season.
Clearly a mixed bag, judging by the games yesterday.
Kieran, we had a couple of interesting upset wins, which there always are in week one. Probably the one that stood out the most was the Patriots over the Bengals. And in fairness to the Patriots, everyone was down on them, including them being down on themselves, you might say, during the offseason. They were doing well to manage expectations downwards at pretty much every turn. But one thing that we know they're good at is we know that they're defensively very strong. I mean, their defense statistically was one of the best in the league last year, particularly when you allow for poor field position, because they were the worst offense in the NFL, which obviously puts a huge amount of pressure then on your defensive unit. Over the last half of the season, Patriots sixth against the run, fourth against the run, sixth against the pass. Even getting rid of Matthew Judon, they got some serious ballers there, including Christian Gonzalez. And they didn't make it easy for the Bengals, and ultimately Cincinnati cracked.
Yeah, and Gonzalez is who I was going to bring up. A massive shot in the arm for that defense. A phenomenal player in college, and who got so unlucky with injuries last year. And it was a classic week one, just a right situation for the Patriots. They came up against a cold Joe Burrow. We talked about him last week, about Joe Burrow in September, just doesn't get it done. He's now 8-1 in September. So he's your classic, cold starter. He'll warm up when the weather gets cold, but they got him at the right time, and nothing clicked for the Bengals, whether it be the Jamar Chase conversation, whether it be, Zach Moss not being able to get the ball going. Whatever the rationale was or whatever the reasoning, they got him at the right time. But that defense was just locked down. Like I told Brian last night, it was almost like a throwback to the Patriots of old, just suffocating defense, swarming, not giving anybody a chance, in your face, blitzing. And, Gerard Mayo played a great game. He really did. He got exactly what he needed out of that team. He shut down weapons for the Bengals. He obviously they got Joe Burrow at a good time. Maybe there's some niggling things still with that wrist injury, but everything aligned for the Patriots, and a win like that on the road against a Super Bowl favorite was phenomenal. Really great result for the Patriots.
Brian, I may be suffering from cognitive dissonance here because I was high on the Bengals for this season, as I was last season. I'm a big fan of Joe Burrow. I'm not particularly worried because I think this, over the course of the season, is probably one of those week one results that we're going to look back on and go, how did they beat them again? I completely forgot about that one. And I think the Bengals will get going. But at the same time, one of the things that you look at and you scratch your head is you've allowed 2 contract situations to develop there where you got 2 of the best wide receivers in the league, both of whom are pissed off going into this game, which isn't very clever, which you could have sorted out and you didn't sort out. They missed Joe Mixon as well. And ultimately, it's a very poor start to the season for them in an AFC North, which, as we know, is going to come down to the wire.
Yeah, we touched on it last night. You didn't, I suppose, refer to the offensive line, and obviously they went for first round with an offensive line, and again the offensive line yesterday, there was no cohesion there for large parts, and Steelers defense was controlling. The Patriots defense was controlling the line of scrimmage for large parts of the game and putting Burrow under pressure. Zach Taylor is 1-10. Oh no, obviously it's week 2 to come on their way to the Chiefs, but he's 1-10 week 1 and week 2 since he took on the job all those years ago. Like that's damning in a way that you just don't find a way. Is it a case that they're just not prepared for the start of the season? And I've seen some of the locker room celebrations from certain teams where the head coach is pointing out we were prepared and the other team wasn't. They weren't ready for the start of the season. It feels that way. It feels like they have to ease their way into the season. Most people, like, they lose this weekend to the Chiefs. They're 0-2 and they're behind the 8 ball very quickly, and they're behind the 8 ball. And there's a loss against the Chiefs in terms of seeding come January. And you're right about the contracts. Like Jamar Chase, where's his head is at? He supposedly he was deal on Saturday, and that's the reason why he was down as questionable as opposed to the contract dispute. And Higgins wants to get signed. It's kind of damning. Like that's all going to have to come to a head at some stage. Like unless they can, I suppose, manage a Jerry Jones situation where he gets Lamb and he gets Prescott all signed up. But like it's hard to see how they're going to pay both wide receivers. Ultimately, I think one of them, and it's T. Higgins in particular, I think will be the one that loses out in the long run. It's just hard to say. I think they'll get it back together, but it's a huge loss. And again, I suppose, was complacency a factor because no one was giving the Patriots any opportunity to go in. Nobody selected the Patriots whatsoever in that game, and the Patriots play for their new head coach and ultimately get out there with a victory. And one that probably they got the Bengals at the right time early on in the season.
Falcons might have thought they were getting Steelers at the right time, Noel, as Russell Wilson pulled out with a calf injury. Justin Fields taken over there at quarterback for that one. We were saying that Mike Tomlin would have the Steelers ready to go, and it was a question of whether the Falcons, with all the change they've had in the offseason, would be tuned up and ready to roll in week 1. And it turned out they weren't. A very inauspicious debut for Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a tough day for Kirk Cousins. I think people looked at obviously a quarterback like himself, an experienced guy coming in with a lot of young weapons who have potential to kind of be explosive players. And it was just it was a tough day for him going in against the Steelers. Obviously, the Steelers are always a tough team to play against defensively. And Mike Tomlin team is always up for it. And I just think looking at this game, I expected probably a little bit more out of the Falcons. But I think when your quarterback doesn't click and it's not going, then you've kind of got issues there. I think he threw 2 interceptions on the day. But I don't think they even, watching the game, I didn't get to see all of this game, but from what I've seen, I don't think they were using them correctly in what Kirk Cousins is good at. And I just wonder again, we're looking at week 1, and maybe we're looking at an older player coming back off an injury who is just bedding into a new team. But you look at the Steelers, and look, the Steelers do what they do. They're just a solid team that will go out and frustrate you. Like I even look at the score of the game, and it just feels like a Steelers score. It's that kind of a game. But a lot more will be expected from Cousins, and I wonder now if there'll be a kind of panic shouts. You'd be talking about overreaction one day, overreaction week 1, but we know what it's like in a lot of cities. The backup quarterback is the most favourite and loved player on the team, and obviously they make that big move for Penix. And I wonder now if the fans will be calling for that. Clearly, the team won't. Obviously, it's week 1, and I think you can expect an experienced player like Cousins maybe over the next few weeks to bed in better, but this week was disappointing in week 1.
The Steelers, though, Kieran, they are built for the hard road. Like that defense is legit, and if you're not ready for it, it can be a really tough day at the office. So, which means they're very strongly leveraged to good quarterback play. If they get anything out of either Fields or Wilson this season, they could actually be quite dangerous.
Yeah, and even their kicker too. I mean, 6 field goals that won the game. That's all they needed. not a juggernaut on offense, but they do just enough. Kind of like last year, they scraped those wins out, those kind of 15-12, 16-14 wins, never breaking big figures. But TJ Watt was the story yesterday. I mean, just lining up on that, at the end, he was just like a trigger, just firing out. Called for a couple of offsides, but he had talked earlier about watching tape and he knew exactly what to do. He had that O-line for the Falcons all sussed out. He's rapidly becoming one of the top 3 players in the NFL. Yesterday was all about him. But going back to Cousins, 2 interceptions, just not a great day for Kirk, and the Boo Birds and the panic story will go on and on. Like I mentioned to Brian last night, when you see Arthur Blank on the sideline with 40 seconds to go, it's like the Grim Reaper out there. Nothing good happens with Blank on the sideline with 40 seconds left. But TJ Watt was the story for me. If they can get that out of him every week, that's going to be a big slug in the AFC North with everybody else.
Brian, Jim Harbaugh, I thought the Chargers were going to charger in week 1. I thought it was going to take them a while to get going. I thought the Raiders would win this one, so I was wrong on all counts there. And Jim gets to win in SoFi in front of I was going to say an adoring crowd. Whatever 14 players or fans turned up for the Chargers were delighted with what they saw.
Yeah, it didn't look that way for a large part. I think the first half, the Raiders were probably going in a halftime wondering why they didn't have a bigger margin of score in terms of the lead. But the Chargers defense stepped up. Yes, it is the defense over the last 3 or 4 years that we've been questioning under the former head coach. But 3 turnovers, 2 turnover and downs, and then ultimately the game was put away by what Kieran suggested on Thursday night. They would run all over the Raiders. I mean, J.K. Dobbins finished with 135 yards rushing. Connor, 131 of them were in the second half. Essentially took over the game. I know he had the one towards the end, which essentially put the game away, but exactly played into the nature of what I thought it would be with selecting the Chargers. I know Kieran probably felt similar, that they would keep themselves in the game. They do nothing special on offense, with the exception of maybe the odd play, and keep them. And then come the 2 or 4 quarter, start running the ball, get effective targeting defense with the Raiders. And ultimately, that's how it played out. And it was feisty in itself. Obviously, you're in SoFi. You've got thousands of Raiders fans. It's a big scrap, as we call it, Connor, on the field, and it fell also into the stands, which it's not good to see. But ultimately, I suppose Harbaugh was in there getting his players out of harm's way, and I think he referred to it in the dressing room after. Let's look after ourselves, and if the other team wants to fight, let them fight between themselves. Big win, divisional clash. It played out as I thought. I thought the Chargers would pull away, and they got the win.
Well, I suppose we didn't talk about it much in the run-up to the game, but it must have played in the Chargers' mind that they got absolutely emptied out by the Raiders last season, and that 67 points drubbing. So they weren't going to show up without pride to play for and without a chip on their shoulders and wanting to rub it in the Raiders' faces. Yeah,
I think they've moved on. I think things have evolved from back then. I know there's some players still there, but this is a brand new regime, and he has all the narratives and he has all the spins.
It's a brand new regime, but it's not a brand new fan base. Like, the fans would have wanted vengeance for that.
If there was a fan base out there, and obviously Leash is a big Chargers fan, and Owen Healy as well, like, they were clamoring for Harbaugh from the back end of last season, when it was starting to kind of become evident that he was in his last hurrah with Michigan and he was going to walk away if they won the championship. And obviously that came to pass. And there was a conversation with the Bears. I know Noel has expressed his feelings previously. He'd like to see him go to Chicago, but it just seemed like that was the right fit, and he was going to go back into the NFL and go to the Chargers. It's a nice environment for him. I was reading an article last week. He's living like 10 miles from the facilities between the stadium and the Chargers facility. He doesn't have to go anywhere, and by all accounts, he doesn't want to go anywhere. Essentially, it's his life now. Drive to the facility, drive to the stadium, road games, go home. It's all about the Chargers. The players will buy into this. He will bring this Chargers team as far as they can go. Will it be pretty to watch? Probably not. Will they make the playoffs? Probably not. But they're in a far better position than they were under Staley. I think by the time he got to the back end of last season, he completely lost the locker room. I think as long as he doesn't, I suppose we see some volatile stuff during the season, I think the players will buy into what he's doing.
Now, the final talking point we wanted to cover this evening is the poor old Panthers got absolutely waxed by the Saints. Saints put up 47 points. Divisional games you normally expect to be tightly fought contests, particularly in week one. This was anything but. It seems now a long way away from the light for the Panthers. They would not have wanted that.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's a rumor out there. I may have gone for the Panthers in the predictions beforehand. I don't know who started that, but I don't know if anybody can prove that. I think it was just a typo on the graphic. Look, this game was over on the first pass play for Bryce Young. His first play is an interception, and the Saints just absolutely took control. Even just looking at the stats of the game, it's shocking. I mean, the Saints had 379 total yards to the Panthers 193. Yeah, I think this is the worst team in football. Coming into the season, I was kind of holding some hope that maybe they'd made enough moves around them, maybe they'd done enough kind of just to not make them a good team, but just maybe give them a chance to be a little bit better and to see what Bryce Young has. But I'm afraid at this point now, it's just not looking good. I'm not a big Saints fan, but they went out and they did exactly what they needed to do yesterday. They got a bad team in front of them, and they absolutely bullied them. Yeah, I don't know where the Panthers go from here. To be honest, it's another number one pick at the end of this season.
And it's certainly making that last second round pick that the Bears have left over from the trade a couple of years ago looking a little bit more valuable if they continue to go along. Right, we will leave it there, except just to say that we're not talking Giants this week. We'll kick that into next week, even though we have two Giants on the show, two Giants fans on the show. I'm sure there'll be better things ahead to talk about. It just remains for us to award Sam Darnold the Player of the Week, the former Jets quarterback, for what he did to Daybot and the Giants over the weekend. And we leave it at that. We'll be back with you very soon. We have our live show, of course, on Thursday, and a Thursday night football preview with Brian and Kieran coming up with lots more content across the rest of the week too, as we head into week 2.